Gavoor. I would like to present the SCM Pro or the LINC's Learning Block 1. It's an overview of the course, a supply chain overview, and the demand planning module for this. So this LINC's in supply chain is a consortium of in supply chain management, and it's run out of Broward College in Florida. And it's in conjunction with the Council for Supply Chain Management. And it leads to a certification in supply chain management principles certification. There's a lot of certifications. We're looking at the base level in this class. And there are 7 activities involved. So these are based on slides from Union County College that I've adapted. So supply chain management principles. It provides an overview of supply chain functions. And, there are additional certification tracks in here. Demand planning, supply management and procurement, warehousing operations, inventory management, manufacturing for service operations, transportation operations, and customer service operations. Those are the 7 modules we have. And that together, if you pass the exam for that, you get the Supply Chain Management Pro Fundamentals Certificate. Requires 70% on the exam, and the best way to study for it is to do the homework assignments we assign, the learning block quizzes, and the common learning block quizzes, because there's questions from both. We're only covering the learning block in this, but if you go through the quizzes for the common learning block, you will also learn. You will learn what you need, the questions that are taken from those quizzes. So when we look at customer value drives the supply chain, well, that's exactly what we're trying to do here. You're always trying to provide service to the customer. If you think about the lifeblood of a company being their ability to take and fulfill orders, well, you're taking orders from customers and you're fulfilling them to customers. You're giving them goods and services. They're giving you money. The way you get your revenue is by actually, 1, selling them your products and services. That's the job of the sales force. But then the supply chain is to make sure that you actually can deliver the goods or the services. So it's critical. Selling by itself isn't enough. If you don't have inventory or you're not able to fulfill the order, you failed. You do not get the sale. The sale was made, but you don't get the revenue for it. So operations is critically important along with sales in this regard. And the actual products and service offerings have to match what customers are asking for. Now, notice that there's 2 different kinds of fulfillment here. My background is mostly in consumer packaged goods, which means you're making most of what you sell in anticipation of sales. You're making your product to stock. You don't make a box of Cheerios or a can of soup when a customer buys one. That would be make to order. You do that when you have aircraft carriers. If the U.S. Navy comes to a shipbuilding company and wants a ship, the shipbuilding company says, let's step out on the lot. I got 17 in stock right now. What color exterior and interior do you want? No, the U.S. Navy orders the ship from the shipbuilding company, and the shipbuilding company does not build it in anticipation. You cannot build consumer goods that you sell in the hundreds of thousands and millions to order necessarily. So that's really kind of what we're talking about here. Not as much make to order, but make to stock. And supply chain operations set up and provide products and services that customers value at the prices they're willing to pay, like we talked about in the other presentation. So our goal here is to prepare you for further study in supply chain management, should you choose. It's not for everybody, but if you get the bug, what can we say? So the core structure here is we have a demand planning, which we're going to do first, supply management, procurement, which is the purchasing function next, buying the raw pack, sub-assemblies, and finished goods that you need. Warehousing operations, if you build things in anticipation to stock or buy things in anticipation of transforming them into finished goods, you have to store them someplace, and a warehouse is where you do that. And when you put something into storage, you'd like to know where it is, on how much of it, and be able to account for how much of it you have, and therefore run an efficient storage location. Not like sometimes in your house when you buy a sleeve of batteries from Costco of 48 batteries and then wonder where the heck you put them. So within a warehouse is inventory. The warehouse management is where did I put it and how much do I have in the warehouse at one time. Inventory management is how much should I have and where should I stage this inventory in anticipation of future sales. And I don't want to have too much inventory because then I've sucked up cash. And if I have too little inventory, I'm going to have to cut sales. Cutting sales, too little inventory is bad. That gets everybody's attention very quickly. Too much inventory will get the C-level attention, CFO and the CEO, but only if you're really required to rent additional space because you have so much, and that happens. Next, what should I make and when should I make it and in what quantities? That's your manufacturing operations. Or being able to execute your service orders is also combined in this learning block 5. If you have the right inventory in the right place at the right time in the right quantities and you get a sale, you then have to move that inventory that comprises that sale. And again, I'm not worrying about service as much right now as I am about goods-based operations. I have to get those goods into the hands of the customer wherever they are. So I require transportation in order to do that. And if I manage transportation well, it's a minimum cost. If I don't manage transportation well, it basically costs more. And then on top of all this is handling customer orders. So that's customer service management. It's tending to the customer from an operations standpoint beyond what just the salespeople do, but it's in conjunction with what the salespeople do. As you can tell, I tend to favor manufacturing more than service. 1, because that's my background, and 2, that's the natural bias of these kinds of courses. Service is important, but it has never really been the central part of an operations course. It's always been the goods part, but we will talk about services as well. So let's do a supply chain overview. So what is supply chain management? What is operations? Some people use them interchangeably. So a supply chain is a system of people and processes, and the processes often include technology, in moving and processing resources and services from raw and packaging materials to the end user in the form of the finished goods. So it's the flow of materials, information, and finances as they move in all directions from supplier to manufacturer to wholesaler to retailer to consumer. This example here is talking about farm to fork. Things are grown, livestock is raised, crops are grown on farms. The livestock or the crops are sent to either a packaging house where they're packaged for consumer use or transformed into something else. Like if you take raw potatoes and just package them and sell them to consumers, that would be packaging. If you take raw potatoes and send them to a Frito-Lay plant and they're washed, sliced, fried, salted, or seasoned, bagged, boxed into potato chips, and then sent to wholesalers or to the retailer directly, that's a manufacturing plant that's processing. It's not just packaging. So sometimes there's wholesalers, sometimes there's not. And it oftentimes, we're talking about goods that go to retailers. The retailer could be a grocery store. In the case of food, it could also be a restaurant. And then the consumer is the customer is the person that buys it from the retailer. The consumer is the person that uses the product at the end. The difference being the mother is a customer for, or the parent is a customer for buying baby food, but the baby in the house is the consumer. Similarly with dog food. Other times, I'm the customer and I'm the consumer if I buy a sandwich, or if I buy lunch meat, or if I buy a bunch of bananas. So what is a supply chain? Two or more parties linked by a flow of resources, material, information, and money that ultimately fulfill a customer request. End customers drive the supply chain because they're the ones that ultimately pay for all the activities. They create the demand and the value and expectations that drive the supply chain strategy. So candy bar supply chain. What are the materials? Where do they come from? What does the supply chain look like? Are there different possibilities? What types of planning is required? What things can go wrong? And is there a need for contingency planning? Well, you can guess this yourself. What are the materials? Well, we need some cocoa or processed cocoa. We need sugar of some sort. We need nuts if we're going to have nuts in the candy. We need emulsifiers and whatever the heck else you might have, those chemicals that are for preservatives and whatnot. Where do they come from? Well, most cocoa products come from tropical regions, I think mostly in Africa. What does the supply chain look like? The cocoa beans are are harvested, put on a ship, shipped to the United States, sold to pre-processors who probably turned it into cocoa powder and then, or some sort of pre-chocolate. And again, I've never worked in candy, so I'm not sure about it. One of you that picks how a chocolate bar is made for your paper would be a good thing to look at. Those are bagged and then sent to the candy producer, as are all the other ingredients that go into the candy. Those are released from the raw and pack warehouse into the factory. The factory mixes and heats and cooks and cools and processes, stamps the candy into various shapes. And they've got to decide when they're going to make the candy and in what quantities for the particular thing. No company really makes just one kind of candy anymore. They make a variety of different things, so they can't make everything at once. What do you produce when? What things could go wrong? Well, if you're making Snickers and you don't have peanuts, you cannot make Snickers. Well, I guess you could make Milky Way, which is caramel and nougat and chocolate, but no peanuts. That's something that could go wrong. If the ingredients you get, the raw ingredients, are not in the right quantity, you can't make the quantity you want to make. If they come in at poor quality, you have to make a decision. Do I want to compromise the quality of my finished goods, or do I want to delay my production until I have the right quality of raw and packing materials? These all involve when things go wrong, and things go wrong when you're making hundreds of different products in a factory. You need, instead of plan A, then you're going to plan B. You need some sort of methodology for contingency planning to make that work. So let's start talking about demand planning. They talk about supply chain management is about balancing supply and demand. Yes. Well, you want to anticipate your demand so that you have the right products in the right place at the right time, in the right quantities at the right time, at the right cost, at the right quality, so that when you get an order, you can fill the order. So you have to have some idea of what your order stream is going to look like, so that you can have the right inventory in the right place at the right time, and therefore have a balance. If people order something, you have it. We noticed that in the early days of the pandemic, demand changed dramatically for things like toilet paper and paper towel, and they were not on the shelves. And also, disinfectants, wipes, and all that stuff. People were just buying them at an increased rate. Canned soda. We had a shortage of aluminum cans. How could we have a shortage of aluminum cans? The Pepsis and Cokes of the world make tons of this stuff. But half the soda served in the country, or half the drinks served in the country, and I'm making a big guesstimate here, are in paper cups. The other half is in cans. All of a sudden, when 3/4 of the country is staying home and not being out and buying their drinks in, fountain drinks in paper cups or plastic cups, they're buying them in cans. So you had a supply chain that was delivering X volume of cans, and now you have a 30% increase, a 40% increase in that volume. You don't have the capacity short term to increase your ability to produce the cans that you need. That's called balancing. You want to produce what you're going to sell. And you want to sell what you've produced. You want those numbers, the closer they are to being equal, the more smoothly your business runs. So demand planning is the first link of a function in a company that begins the supply chain planning process. Again, we're talking about goods that you make to stock, not goods that you make to order. So here's the objectives. Describe the integrated business management. Explain how demand shaping is used to manage demand. Distinguish between qualitative and quantitative methods of forecasting. We'll cover next week some quantitative methods. Cursory look at it. Categorize the different types of demand patterns. Identifying causes of the bullwhip effect on the supply chain. I think the bullwhip effect, and because of the ability of information to move much more effectively, is not as big an issue as it was when I was your age. Recognize materials requirements planning, capacity requirements, distribution requirements planning, all of this stuff. How do you plan all of this so that you have the resources that you need to make, move, and store everything that you think you need in anticipation of sales that are forthcoming? So explain the mechanisms and benefits of CPFR, which we'll explain, of course. So a demand planning overview. Again, we've talked about this the diagrams are all the same, or all different, but all kind of say the same thing. Supply chains are the flow of materials, information, finances. They move through in both directions, from raw ingredients, mines and farms, to factories, to warehouses, to stores, to the homes, into the hands of customers and end customers and consumers. Again, it makes much more sense if we're thinking about this in the world that I worked in, which is consumer packaged goods. the things that you would buy at a grocery store. So again, while we talk about goods and services and we talk about all kinds of different operations and operations management, a course like this focuses on products that are consumer packaged goods, CPGs, the things that you buy in stores that you frequent, that households frequent. All right, so demand planning is a process used to create reliable supply chain forecasts. In other words, we're trying to anticipate what we're going to sell, what people are going to buy. Effective demand planning helps improve the accuracy of revenue forecasts, aligns inventory levels with peaks and troughs or valleys in demand, and enhances the profitability within a given channel or supply chain for a class of products. Like you may have a company that produces different kinds of products, and they may have different channels through which they distribute that. So demand planning overview, balancing supply with demand. There's something called sales and operations planning. We're not going to cover it in great depth here, but all of this, all demand planning starts with a forecast. What do we think we're going to sell? And all forecasting is based on the immediate future kind of looking like the immediate past. And then we plan. We adjust that forecast based on market knowledge. Our stores opening, our stores closing, a wrinkle like the start of the pandemic in March of 2020 threw everybody's demand plans out the window. And then you do some internal and external collaboration. In other words, if I'm selling to Walmart and we're planning what we're going to sell through their stores, they not only should, they insist on driving that process and everybody being on the same page for the numbers that you're going to build to and what we think we're going to sell. So it's easier to balance supply and demand when the forecast is accurate. But forecasting, and this is not a big surprise, is predicting the future. And people are just not good at it because the future is unknown. Pure and simple. Things happen, and what you think was going to happen doesn't. So you need to pay close attention and adapt. And what's close enough? How close should your forecast be? Everybody, your age in a class, you've not done it before. You're thinking, well, the forecast accuracy should be 90, 95, 100%. Well, sometimes people are dancing. It depends on what the demand variation is. Remember, stats is a prereq for this course. Variation. What is the standard deviation of historical sales? If it's high, you're not going to be able to forecast very well because that means that your sales vary from period to period. And the period we use for forecasting tends to be 1 month. It could be a day, it could be an hour, it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be a year. Most forecasting is done in monthly buckets in consumer packaged goods. So information drives the process. What the heck did we sell? What do we think we're going to sell? How do we make a projection? Are my sales generally going up for this product that I'm forecasting? Are they generally going down? Are there other information that I need to know? It would be great to know if a key raw ingredient is unavailable, because that means no matter what you forecast, you cannot make it. So your sales are going to be limited because of that. Has some company gone out of business that you used to sell to? Has some company that you're selling to increasing the size of their business? and a variety of different things happen. There's volume and there's physical volume of goods that you sell, and there's dollar volume. If two of your large customers merge, you might sell the same volume of product to them, in that the number of items that you sell, the physical cans of soup or tubes of toothpaste or pens or whatever the case may be, but your dollar volume may go down because all of a sudden they have more purchasing power and say, listen, now I'm 50% of your sales. Let's talk about price reduction. And what are you going to do when someone that's 40, 50, 60% of your sales comes and asks you that question? It happens. And oftentimes the name of that company is Walmart. Integrated business management. If we're talking about supply chain management, you have supply chain planning, sourcing and procurement, and supply chain execution. Planning. What do we think we're going to make? So it's demand planning and forecasting, which we're going to talk about here. You have supply network planning. So then you have to let all your suppliers know. If you're building bicycles, you have to let the people your tires know that make your tires. If we're going to produce 10,000 bicycles this month, I'm going to need 20,000 tires. Times two. I have to buy some chain. I don't make my own chains. I buy them. The little handlebar wraps, brake systems, pedals, etc., etc., etc. So I have to communicate to them what my plan is and when I want these goods. And we don't plan for just the next month. Walmart plans on an 18-month horizon. So at the time I'm giving this talk right now, we have, it's the month of January. So I'm preparing my February forecast for Walmart. Well, I have to prepare that for February 2021 through February of 2022, and then add 6 months to that. So 2 plus 6 is 8 through August of 2022. They look at an 18-month rolling forward forecast. Now, obviously, the forecast for February 2021 is going to be much more fixed than the preliminary forecast for August of 2022, but that's how the process starts. And in each of those next 18 months, by the time I get to June or July of 2022, the August numbers should be pretty well refined and agreed upon by the two companies. So then you do your material resource planning. You have your inventory planning and optimization, where you want to stage all your inventory, where you're going to build it. You do your vendor managed inventory, which we'll talk about next week, or when we talk about procurement. You'll do your transportation planning, your logistics planning. How do I move it? Now, if you're buying stuff from a supply network, that's stuff that I don't make for my bicycles. Maybe I only make the frames. Everything else I buy and I assemble them. I've got to get my seats, seat poles, bolts, nuts, spokes, rims, tires, bearings, chains, pedals, handlebar stem, handlebars, brake systems, gearing systems, blah, 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 blah. I have to buy all of that from the outside and have it in the right quantities at the right place at the right time, so that when I build the quantities that I want to build, so I have finished good inventory in the right place in the right quantities at the right time, that requires MRP, inventory planning, and sourcing and procurement working very hard to make sure all of this happens, that you've got everything lined up, that you're able to buy the materials that you need and they're delivered accurately and on time. And then I actually execute the actual making of my own finished goods. Order management and fulfillment from the various stores that sell my bicycles. I want to look at my transportation and fleet management to make sure I can ship these things and I have trucks available and trailers available. I don't own or operate my own trucks. I want to make sure that I've got the warehouses well run, well managed, and enough space to store the items that I'm going to build in anticipation of future sales. I want to manage my inventory. We'll talk a little bit about reverse logistics later. And if I'm going to provide replacement parts, I've got to make sure that I've got that well planned. What goes across all of these things together is supply chain collaboration between suppliers, yourself, and your customers, the companies that you do business with, not necessarily the buying public. Supply chain visibility and risk management, and business intelligence. So it's planning, procurement, operations, logistics, integration, customer service, much like the order in which we're covering items in this class. So supply chain strategy has to support corporate strategy. It'd be silly to have a corporate strategy and then have a supply chain strategy that does something completely different or completely unaware of the corporate strategy, because most corporate strategies are, we're de-emphasizing this product, we're moving into this product line, we're going to emphasize this more, we may make an acquisition, we may make a divestiture, who knows what. And the supply chain has to go along with that. We're going to move from just being a U.S. company to maybe an international company. We're no longer going to do business in South America, but we're going to do more business in Europe, whatever the case may be. We're going to sell more, racing bicycles, let's stick with the bicycle example, than leisure bicycles, serious fitness bicycles versus, beach bicycles, or vice versa. And guess what? You have to adapt your supply chain to follow the corporate strategy. So what are the company's goals? How do they want to serve customers? Where do they want to compete? What's the price, service, innovation, flexibility? What are the competencies? So you need to know all that. And then you need to look at supply chains are managed by an integrated business plan based on these strategies. So you've got to help support that, or else you're not going to be able to fulfill the orders. Remember, the lifeblood of a company is selling things, taking orders and fulfilling them, and then getting paid for them. So integrated business management. If you look at demand management, includes both the recognition of customer demand and the shaping of that demand through marketing and sales strategies. So you have a market share, shareholder value, revenue, profitability. Here is your supply chain down here. You have a supplier, you have your plant, you have your manufacturing distribution center, you have your customer distribution center, you have your customer store, and finally the consumer. So if I'm thinking about bicycles, those suppliers are Continental, that makes my tires. They bring it into my plant where I take those tires and put it with all the other parts that come in from all the other suppliers and assemble them into a bicycle. The only thing I make myself might be the frame. And in a serious fitness or racing bicycle, the frame is critically important, like the wings of an airplane almost. When I finish those and package them up, I put them in my own distribution center, my own warehouse, from which I take orders and I ship them to either a local bicycle store directly, or if it's to a large chain, like a large sporting good company, REI, for example, I ship it to their DC and they distribute those goods to their stores. And then consumers come in and buy from that final store. So this is consumer packaged goods all the way. It's all make to stock. As soon as you see warehouses, two levels of warehouses, manufacturing distribution center and customer distribution center, you know that it's make to stock. Materials, production, deployment. And you have a business plan, you have a demand plan, then you have a supply plan. One feeds the other. So some organizations have ERP systems which integrate individual forecasts and plans. Well, not only some organizations, a lot of organizations now have ERP. What is ERP? Enterprise Resource Planning. Think SAP, think Oracle, think um, Microsoft's ERP system. And there are countless other ones that apply to small businesses of various different types. Sales and operations planning is taking the various parts of your own organization, and you could have all kinds of different forecasts. You have a budget that you put together at the beginning of the year of what you think you're going to sell. And that budget is made of every product that you sell. What quantities do you think we're going to sell over the whole year? Maybe by quarter, maybe by month. That's a sales plan. That's a demand plan. You might have a statistical forecast-based plan that usually the operations people create. Now, the budget could be aspirational, and the statistical plan takes the most recent past and projects into the most near-term future, and you have a demand plan. Well, it's not going to be the same as the budget, so now you have two. And then you have what the sales people and maybe the marketing people separately think they're going to sell. So the budget plan is from finance. The forecast is from operations. The sales plan is obviously from sales, and they may not match. The whole point of sales and operations planning is say, hey, you knuckleheads from all your different functions, why don't you get together, talk about this, and come up with one flipping number that we're going to use. So all sales and operations planning starts with a statistical forecast done by operations. Then you compare that to the budget and a sales plan. And really, the sales plan is based on sales intelligence to a certain degree. And marketing, especially in consumer products, the marketing role is an important role in there, maybe even more so than sales, because they're the product managers. And you put all these people together and you come up with one integrated demand plan. So a forecast, it's still a forecast, but it's based on a statistical forecast with added market information and business savvy to come up with a refined forecast. So a demand plan is a sophisticated way of saying forecast. And when you say demand plan, it says, oh, here's how much we're planning to sell. It sounds more important than forecast, which sounds like, well, I don't know, this is what I think we're going to sell. This is my guesstimate. So sales and operations planning has 4 key processes. I think depending on where you look at it, there's different ways of looking at it. You analyze and predict sales of new products through market and competitive analysis. You analyze the demand by collaborating with supply chain partners. Compare the financial targets by taking the supply and demand plan and translating it into similar values. Review management strategies by translating strategic goals into planned production and other core business processes. I don't know. I don't like this one. I have a different presentation entirely on S&OP, sales and operations planning, that if you're interested, I can forward a video along. So balance supply and demand. Here's the key, really. If your supply is greater than your demand, you have excess inventory. Excess inventory sucks up cash. If your demand is greater than your supply, well, you've lost sales. This really irritates CFOs and CEOs and chief sales and chief marketing officers because they think they've made the sale. And if you in the supply chain don't have the product available to fill the order, well, if it was an order for $50,000 and you had to cut half of it and you were only able to reap $25,000 of revenue for that $50,000, they've got to go find that revenue someplace else, and it's your fault. Now, if I have more supply than I have demand, I have excess inventory. That sucks up cash, like I said. But the problem is when you have more supply than demand, it means you guessed wrong, or the salespeople sold wrong. Either way, you built the wrong stuff for what sold. So there's a very likely both happen at the same time because the balance isn't there. In other words, they always use a scale for this. You don't have the balance, that's what happens. So we're constantly changing our production schedule to match what's happening. It's not an unlikely scenario that we have a plan at the beginning of the month. We're going to sell 1,000, whatever it is, pens, bicycles, tubes of toothpaste of a specific version. Well, halfway through the month, you expect to sell 50% of it. Well, of course, that's never the case because you always have this thing called month-end peaking because your customers are well trained to not buy anything until it's towards the end of the month and you're freaking out because you're not going to make your numbers and drop your price. Fact of life. But if it's the middle of the month, like January 15th, and you're supposed to sell 1,000, but you've only sold 100, it really looks dim that you're going to sell 1,000 in the next 2 weeks if you only sold 100 in the first 2 weeks. Was it a bad forecast? Was it what? So do I want to make the rest of that? Maybe I made it already. Oops, I'm stuck with it. If I haven't made it, well, that frees me up to make, if this product that I was going to sell 1,000 of didn't sell, maybe another product that I was going to sell 2,000 of has already sold to 2,000 by January 15th, and I want to make more of it. Well, thank God I'm able to take the production capacity that I was going to use for the first product of 1,000 and apply that to the second product. So you've got to be on it and looking at it all the time. So you're increasing and decreasing production, increasing and decreasing inventory. You're improving your flexibility in manufacturing to be able to zig and zag when you have to. You have a fixed manufacturing plan for a week, but maybe you don't last a day before you change that. But you plan, you adapt, you modify. And when you're dealing with suppliers, you're expediting. You're calling up and saying, oh, whoa, we don't need all those tires. We're not going to sell that many bicycles. Or, oops, this version of the bike is selling like crazy. We need a lot more of those tires that go on this bike, etc. You get the picture. Demand shaping. So it's influencing demand so it matches supply. Well, this is a hard thing to do. Dell may shape demand by adjusting the product price or the lead time. So if they, for example, Dell may shape demand by adjusting the product price or the lead time. They're able to shape the demand by lowering prices and attracting more demand for their overstock of 17-inch monitors, or the Inspiron laptop, or whatever the case may be. How do they change lead times? Well, Dell could tell the customer that it will take 4 days for their preferred laptop to be shipped, but other laptops are available like in 1 day or 2 days. So they're constantly balancing their ability to do this with pricing changes and getting people's orders to them quicker. And people are willing to change. If they get a good enough deal and can get things faster and think they can sell them, well, they'll buy them. In order to offer customers these different options, they have to have information technology that is sophisticated enough to track their available inventory and assembly schedules. You cannot do this without a really good business process enabled and supported by a really well-run and organized ERP system. So external, internal balancing. External. Well, how do you balance supply and demand? Well, you adapt the price and lead time. That's what Dell did. We just talked about that. You plan new product introductions along with your customers. You identify cross-selling opportunities and complementary products the best you can. Internally, you shift excess demand to a future period, or you reallocate your excess supply, ability to make product, to other products. So flexible manufacturing and buying. Build excess inventory during periods of lean demand. I mean, I worked for a company that made Sharpies. They were really interested in keeping their factory running. They want to keep the efficiency of their factory. They call it utilization. Because utilization accounts for your fixed cost per unit. So if my fixed cost for a month is, let's say, $30,000, and I make one Sharpie pen, the fixed cost per unit for that Sharpie is $30,000. Well, I'm selling the Sharpie for 50 cents. It's a huge loss. And sorry about that. But if I build 1,000,000 Sharpies, or let's make it real easy, it's $30,000, and I build 120,000 Sharpies, it's 25 cents. If I build 250, it's 12.5 cents. If I build 500,000, or 250, 500,000, it's going to be 6.25 cents absorbed fixed costs. So I want to look at that and see how I want to keep it running all the time. So push comes to shove, 50% of the Sharpies sold are black Sharpies. 50%. So the rule in the Sharpie factory was, if you have excess idle time, in the Sharpie lines, make black Sharpies. It's 50% of your sales. You need them. Whether you sell a box of black Sharpies, individual black Sharpies, almost every 2-pack, 3-pack, 5-pack, 10-pack, 24-pack, 52-pack has black Sharpies in it. You don't want to make yellow Sharpies. You sell very few of those. You only sell them, I think, in the 24 and 52 packs. Make black Sharpies. So you need those kinds of rules and flexibility, or mantras, the tenets in manufacturing to be able to do that. So CPFR, collaborative planning and forecasting. So collaborative. I mean, if we look at this is a basic diagram that we want to use. They have these diagrams in in these slides, and sometimes they're really useful, sometimes they're not. I'm not sure about this one. But if you take your demand forecast, you have historical data, and you have sales and marketing business intelligence, that's where you get a demand plan or demand forecast. So your historical data by itself, if you just do a statistical forecast on that, that's your pure statistical forecast. Then you take your market intelligence, and then you have a demand forecast. That demand forecast gets changed into a demand plan, so it matches the estimated future demand with capacity and supply. And then you have the detailed plans for what to buy and what to make. This is the basic planning process in operations. So it's all based on historical data, market intelligence, and a statistical forecast of sorts, turning into a demand plan. Usually I would look at it this way. I would say the historical data gives you a statistical forecast. The sales and marketing happen after you do that and turn it into a demand plan. Then you have a materials resource plan. Remember, if you're making bicycles, I need 2 tires for every bicycle. So I got to multiply the number of bicycles times 2 and tell procurement, we need this number of tires this week, that week, the next week, over the next 4 months. And then you have a master production scheduling plan, and you have your manufacturing execution. So it all starts, however well you do, is how good this demand forecast is. It's really an Achilles heel because you're trying to predict the future. And are we good at predicting the future? Not so good. If we were good, I wouldn't be teaching, well, I would be teaching because I love you guys and I'd want to be here, but I would be probably chauffeur driven to school, and we'd probably have catered lunches that I would pay out of my pocket because I was such a good predictor of the future. People are horrible at it. Collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishing, the CPFR. This is a term that's been around for probably about 15 years. Oh no, probably 25 years at this point. It's a process for sharing visibility, information, and resources that facilitates planning to satisfy customer demand. You do this with your suppliers, you do this with your customers. And where we look at sales and operations planning as being an internal agreement of one number, CPFR, collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment, tends to, well, certainly it works within the company, and S&OP, sales and operations planning, is a specific application of a specific way of doing collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment. But generally, when we talk about CPFR, we're talking about with my customers, with Walmart, with Target, with Dick's Sporting Goods, with whoever it may be. The corporate entities that I sell to. And in consumer products, packaged goods, the stores that sell your product, if you don't sell them directly yourself, which, and again, the model that we use is the manufacturer doesn't. We call those people that sell to consumers the trade. The trade being the stores that you're, and brands that you're, the branded stores that you're so familiar with. Aldi, Walmart, Target, Kroger, Macy's. Amazon is basically one of those too. So, okay. So developing a consensus demand plan requires input from all relevant departments and personnel. And that's why people collaborate. They do this together and they come agreed upon one number. So if I have an agreed upon number in my company for all of the Sharpies I'm going to sell, I'm also going to have an agreed upon number with Walmart of all the Sharpies I'm going to sell. I'm going to have an agreed upon number with the people that provide me with the black plastic pellets that I make the black Sharpie caps out of. And it all translates. So I want to do CPFR, and usually not as much with suppliers, I wouldn't do it, but more with customers, and that helps me build my supply chain plan, or my demand plan and supply plan, and then the supply plan is communicated with the suppliers, which is what the Unit 2, Learning Block 2 is all about. So the goal is improved information flow and product visibility throughout the supply chain. The enhanced visibility comes from the ERP system. It can see all. It can keep track of stuff that you could never keep track of before. So demand forecast, attempts to forecast or anticipate customer demand. Again, this is based on taking the immediate past historical sales data and other business intelligence provided by sales, marketing, and management. But first of all, just taking historical sales data and making a forecast into the future. And it's like the immediate future. I'm not trying to predict 10 years from now. I'm trying to predict the next 5 months, the next 10 months, the next year, and like we said with Walmart, maybe the next 18 months. So I think we've beat this to death here. Organizations use S&OP to develop inputs for the forecast. However, additional collaboration amongst other functions is required. Well, that is a point of S&OP. It forces that collaboration. High-level comprehensive plan initiated by senior level executives with marketing sales inputs is shaped by anticipated customer needs and desires. You know, sometimes senior executives are going to tell you, you've done a good job on this demand plan, but we need to sell more this quarter, this month, this next year, because that's what we've promised our shareholders. So you guys got to figure out a way to do that. Demand forecast also incorporates business elements of vision and expectation for the company's shareholder. Well, just what we talked about. The demand plan is the finished part of all that. And I think we're talking about a supply plan. They've mixed it up a little bit here, but the demand plan outputs are delivered to the MRP. Details of what to procure and buy from suppliers, a master production schedule. Specify which products to make and when to make them and in what quantities, and if you have multiple facilities where you make them and store them, where you're going to make them and where you're going to store them. Some companies have an ERP system that integrates the individual demand forecasts and plans. A lot of companies have that. I mean, it's 2021 for crying out loud. A lot of companies have that. How effectively they use it is another question. So MRP and MPS, Master Resource Planning, that's your interface to your supply base, and Master Production Scheduling is how you can schedule your factories. So demand forecasting models. So you have a quantitative forecast. Historical data exists and is helpful in calculating future demand. A qualitative forecast is little past data, like maybe you're launching a new product and maybe it's something you've never really sold before. I mean, obviously, if you have, you're going to sell Cheerios with blueberries as a new product. And you might look at what's the last time we did something like that. What was the sales jump we anticipated when we did Honey Oat Cheerios? You can use that kind of thing. So you use intuition or expert judgment. So you have the customer forecast, distribution, sell-through, demand, shaping, promo, and design wins. You look at the sales forecast and a marketing forecast, and you look at the demand of the current product. Now, the problem is, if you have a variant of a product, is it going to take sales from the existing product that it's a variant of? So if I launch Blueberry Cheerios, it's just going to take, everybody wants it to go and take sales from some Kellogg products or some other cereal products or some other granola company product. But in actuality, it cannibalizes your own sales. So some of your Cheerios, people say, "Ooh, I was going to buy Cheerios, but maybe I'll buy the Blueberry Cheerios this time." So if 30% of your sales are from your existing customers, your additional you might forecast X, but if 30% of that is taking away from your other products, you only have a 70% gain, if you understand what I'm saying. So you got to be careful of this cannibalization. And then you have a consensus demand plan. And guess what? Unfortunately, every new product is a beloved offspring of some marketing person. And no one thinks, every baby is born to be president of the United States, is it not? So every new product is designed to be the next iPhone. But of course, products fail incredibly. So you can't rely on what the marketing people say it's going to do. If you build to theirs, they're so happy about their product and so excited about it and so enthused about it, their forecasts are always high. So as a operations person, you have to temper that. And you have to almost look at the previous history of new products and maybe revise. Because if you build a mess of stuff and it doesn't sell, then you have obsolete inventory that you're holding, especially if the product fails, like many products will. Maybe Blueberry Cheerios was a horrible idea. You have to put them on deep discount, perhaps sell them below cost just to move them out. And then that's really hard to do because no one wants to take a loss on things. So you got to be very careful about new products. Successful new products are great because whatever you forecast, if you see it's going to be a success, you can adapt kind of quickly. You might be out of stock for a short period of time, but you can ramp it up pretty quickly. So now there's types of demand patterns. Well, there's a stationary pattern, steady, even demand with very little fluctuation. I don't know what would sell that way. Salt, the salt that you use in your house, in the salt shakers. I can't imagine the demand of that has varied very much. Maybe it's going down because people use less salt because at least, especially with hypertension. But I think we're in a stable environment there. It probably sells at a very steady pace. You might have something that's a trend, a predictable growth or decline. If a product is exciting and it's selling, you could have it grow very nicely. Or decline if it's a product that's going out of stock. As we saw LED light bulbs taking more and more of the market share, we saw the old-fashioned incandescent light bulbs declining in sales. You could have a seasonal pattern. Well, what sells seasonal? We're probably not selling many air conditioners in the month of January in Chicago. We're probably selling more windshield scrapers and snow shovels and those kinds of things than we are air conditioners. And in the summer, we're probably selling a lot of air conditioners and almost no snow shovels. So that would be a seasonal pattern. Cyclical happens over long periods of time. Multi-year. Seasonal is within a year. Seasons, winter, spring, summer, fall. Cyclical is like the automotive industry. When I first started in it, was cyclical. It would have 5-year sales patterns, 2 years in the dumps, 5-year increased sales, and then 2 years in a dump. And the stock price almost predictably went the same way. I don't think that's the case anymore in the automotive industry, but it was. And I don't know what else would be cyclical. Seasonal, yes. Then you can have trend with seasonality. If you have a hot new computer kind of product, and maybe it sells more in back to school because it's basically students are the ones buying most of the new ones. You're going to have the peak in the back to school season. But since you're a growing company and people love your products more and more, you have a trend and a seasonality. So now we're talking about, when we do the forecast, we're starting to get into the mathematics of it. How do you assign all of these things? Forecasting, I'll tell you right now, is half math or stats, half art. There's an art and a mathematics to it. So what's the challenge of demand management? Well, coordination and communication within an organization can increase the accuracy of the demand plan. That helps. Getting that S&OP goal of getting to one number, that collaborative forecast with your customers, all of that. Timing of information flow and planning horizons may differ within the company. Well, within your company, you should probably have try to get that to one information flow and planning horizon. That's just me. There's probably a million reasons why you might need more. Demand for new products is particularly difficult, and there's much more variability in demand pattern leads to more challenging planning. If the ratio of the standard deviation in sales over the mean is higher, the closer that is to 1, the harder it's going to be for you to get an accurate forecast. That means there's just a lot of sales volatility in that product. Some things are easier to predict. And independent and dependent demand. We just talked about that. That's the bicycle. Every bicycle has, I'm going to sell 10,000 bicycles, I have to order twice the number of tires, twice the number of rims, and however many spokes per wheel times 2. I have to order 2 pedals. I have to order, one handlebar, one stem, one set of brakes, one set of gearing, blah, 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 blah. So it's independent demand is how much do I think I'm going to sell? Then a dependent demand is based on the components that go into that product. That's dependent. It's based on what we call a bill of materials. It's the recipe that you use. Like when you say you're going to make a cake, you need 2 eggs, 2 cups of flour, blah, 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 blah. Your bill of materials is your recipe list for whatever product you have. And that's the dependent demand. Oops. So forecast, the time between the creation of a forecast and the event that attempts to predict impacts the accuracy of the forecast. It's easier for me to tell you the weather tomorrow because it's most likely going to be like the weather today than for me to tell you what the weather is going to be like in 2 or 3 weeks. The same thing, if I'm forecasting out further, my accuracy is going to be lower because I don't know what's going to happen. If you're trying to forecast things that you're going to sell, and the probability of having a random shock, an event, catastrophic weather event, or that delays shipments of things or keeps people homebound and doesn't have them shopping. If you have news that comes out that you just can't predict, like a government report that says consumption of this product is really good for your health or really bad for your health, will have an adverse impact. And it's less likely to happen if I'm trying to predict my sales for tomorrow than if I'm trying to predict my sales from 18 months from now. I just can't. In the long term, it's harder to do. Short-term forecasts are often referred to as operation or tactical forecasts, while long-term forecasts are referred to as strategic plans or strategic forecasts. So here's a picture. Time until what you're trying to do. The likelihood of forecast error increases. It's conceptual. This is not, you notice there's no numbers on this at all. But the longer the interval between the forecast and the event it's predicting, the higher the likelihood of the forecast error. It's 30-ish degrees and cloudy today, and it's not snowing. What do I expect the temperature to be tomorrow? 30-ish. What do I expect the temperature to be 3 weeks from now? I don't know. I'd probably have to look at the average temperature on that day or that week in February and use that. So it's hard to do. Sometimes inaccuracies are amplified. This is called the bullwhip effect. Inaccurate forecasts create disruption which flows throughout the supply chain. If I pick this wrong, it could amplify as I go backwards. So I have a little ripple here, this very small demand change, but maybe because of that, and because I'm not communicating it well, it amplifies here. And then if I don't see this, and I only see this, maybe I see, my needs amplify further. And by the time I get to the poor supplier, he's being pulled in every which way. Now, the problem with this is that I don't see this. If I see this, I can propagate that through the whole thing. But this involves shared information, which is possible. Walmart will share their daily sales with you. Well, therefore, what you see here, if you get that from all your consumers, you should see this demand here. And then if within your own warehouses and your own manufacturing, what you see here happens here. I'll tell you a story. We were looking at intercompany, when I first started at Colgate-Palmolive, you made in your country what you sold in your country. Well, as we reduced the number of factories in countries, especially the smaller ones, and consolidated manufacturing in bigger countries, you had to ship the product to from country A to country B. Now, country B, when we're trying to decide the inventory buffers and sizes, Everybody made a mistake, except myself and another guy that was working with me. They looked at the sales variation within the country and assumed that was the variation that we were going to use for intercompany order. No, it isn't. And people were going to create a bullwhip effect that was going to create a monstrous amount of inventory. I said, no, we have an inventory buffer in country B to cover the variation of sales to their customers. The order pattern from country A to country B, which country B used to have a factory, but now they don't, and they get their products from country A, that's going to be much smoother. Because we're only placing weekly orders, we're not placing daily orders. It's only one source of order. It's not 50, 60, 70, 300 orders coming in. So that's what we have to look at. And it was just a dickens to convince people that that was the case. It wasn't until we got it going, they're like, oh, I see what you're talking about. Equations enough didn't do it. So this bullwhip effect is kind of interesting. But I think for the most part, at least in the companies I worked with, it wasn't an issue anymore because of the information systems, the ERP systems that had all these people talking to each other in a much more effective way. And you had the collaborative planning and forecasting. So responsiveness, agility. Responsiveness and agile supply chains help moderate the impact of inaccurate forecasts. Yes, that and these inventory buffers, that you have inventory to cover that variation, and you have to know what variation it's covering and not propagate that variation through that inventory buffer to the sources behind it. Now you're probably thinking, what the heck is he talking about? It's not an easy concept to get. Plus, if I can see the information across the entire supply chain, I can see the variation at the source, and I can see how that variation might propagate and where it might not. So here's a demand exercise. It's independent forecasts and demand forecasts, and it's a table. And every table has 4 legs, 2 ends, 2 sides, and a hardware kit. Well, if I'm going to sell 2 tables in January, how many legs will I need? 2 times 4. How many will I need in February? 10 times 4. How many will I need in March? 8 times 4. Wow, look at that. You're doing manufacturing resource planning. How many ends do I need? Well, there's 2 ends. So I need 2 times 2, 10 times 2 in February, etc. How many sides do I need? The same number of ends, because there's 2. How many kits do I need? Well, same number of tables. So this row here would be reproduced down here. Now you understand independent forecast, which is the top. How many tables I'm going to sell. The dependent forecast is all this stuff. Look at that. You're doing manufacturing resource planning already. I'm so proud of you. Planning systems. We talked about materials resource plan and how that interfaces with the supply base. So your suppliers, so detail what to procure, what to buy, what to purchase from suppliers, including consumables, raw materials, semi-finished goods, even finished goods, and other items needed to complete the finished product. Master production scheduling says what you're going to do in the 4 walls of your own factory, using all these materials you get from suppliers. Planning systems. Well, this is a review of that diagram we had before. I don't have anything to add to that. And your ERP system is the spine. If we look at this, it really is the backbone of information. You have all this information, you have one forecast, and you use that one forecast to drive all of this stuff. So an enterprise resource planning system integrates available forecasting and planning data on a shared platform. So everybody can see what everybody is seeing if they have the permission to see it. MRP and MPS functionalities is not often integrated. It is integrated within the ERP systems. Whether people use it right or not, that's the difference between the people part of the system and the system itself. That has to have people, the people have to be operating on the same business process as the system is programmed. Key factor. So here's our summary of demand planning. It's a process used to develop and the demand forecast and demand plan. And it feeds the MRP, material resource process, and the master production schedule. Collaboration among company stakeholders is really important to achieving consensus. This is usually inside the companies called sales and operations planning, between two different companies, either yourself and a supplier, yourself and a trade customer. It's called collaborative planning and resource CPF, collaborative planning and forecasting. The level of systems integration is also critical to ensure individual items forecast and all plan elements are linked and coordinated. This is the role of the ERP system. And I think more and more companies, I've even the smallest entities I've done consulting work with, have some version or form of an ERP system. They may not use it to its full effectiveness, but then that's why they hired me, to point that out to them and help them do it. And that's the end of this presentation. Thank you very much.